Hello, everybody. In today's episode of Grade School, you pick the tools, I do the grading. We're all going to learn a little bit of something today. It should be fun. If you're part of my regular crowd, forgive the upfront formal thumbnail of what we're going to be doing today. I'm told it's helpful for people who are rewatching and are not necessarily joining in on all the fun community vibes. They just want to see what fun stuff we got up to. So hope that's helpful to you if you're watching this recording later. If you're watching it right now, then hopefully you don't mind a little paragraph heading to kick us off. Can everyone see and hear me okay? I hope they can. My friend Annie is here with me. Hello, Annie.
Hi guys, I'm really excited for this one.
This one's going to be cool. So yeah, you guys get your suggestions ready. I see we've already had a couple come in. Here's essentially the framework today. I'm going to do some grading with 3 tools. We can kind of tackle everyone's questions. We can still, discuss whatever you want to discuss, but I want to throw this plot twist of only being able to accomplish whatever we're talking about with the 3 tools that we have selected. So as talked about, I will pick a third. You guys get to pick 2. The really only criteria there is these have to be tools, not qualifiers, if that makes sense. So like, I don't necessarily think of Windows as a tool because I can't actually manipulate anything with a power window. Same thing as like a qualifier. I can't really manipulate the image with a qualifier. I have to do that with something else. So other than things like that, which those are the only 2 that leap to mind right now, everything else is fair play, whether it's like, OpenEffects stuff or Resolve Native stuff. DCTLs, unless it's a DCTL that you know I have, that's probably going to be tough for me to guarantee that I have. But other than that, whatever you guys like. Give me something hard, give me something easy, and then Annie's going to be our informal, vote taker, and we'll get started with that limit in just a second. Let's get warmed up while everyone's getting their suggestions dropped into the chat. Does anyone want to talk about anything? Does anyone have any topics or questions for us today?
We do have a concern at the moment that your audio is pretty low, Cullen.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Let's see if I can see lowness of audio. One moment. Let's see if I can just... Okay, that should be a significant bump, hopefully not a painful bump. Let me know how that sounds. Words, thoughts, ideas. You guys can let us know in the chat how that's sounding and feeling. I'm gonna get my Resolve going here. Oh, and I wanna see who's here, who's in the house. I never get to check. Is Cower Hendrickson here? What's up? Oh, Nathan's here, Max. Oh, Tim's here. I have a feeling I'm about to get thrown some hardballs. I used to play when I was in karate class when I was a kid. That we used to play like dodgeball as like a sort of like warm-up activity at the beginning of karate class. But the fun plot twist that this karate instructor had was we're playing dodgeball with tennis balls. Anybody ever play dodgeball with tennis balls? Those things can hurt, man. You zing one of those things fast enough at your dome, or like, I don't know, a weird part of your body, like it hits like the back of your calf or something, it can really hurt. So. Am I about to field some tennis balls with the tools that are suggested? All right, let's see. What do we need to do here today? Let me get into my Resolve, and I feel like I see plenty of good suggestions coming in. Okay, good, so it sounds like audio's working better now. I'm gonna give you guys just another second to get your votes in. What are you guys working on? Anything fun you're playing around with? Techniques you're kicking around? Let me get my screen share on in anticipation of what we're getting up to here. Yeah, so as well as our sort of like imposing tool set today, obviously I still want to talk about whatever's interesting to you guys, so we can let's think about grading techniques or things we would want to approach within these confines. And just as everyone's getting your answers in, sort of like the idea behind this, the reason for this is it's less of like, I don't want to be like a Harry Houdini, like watch me escape from the, like water coffin using only a toothpick or, whatever, sort of like hijinks I might cook up. really what I want to do is like encourage all of us to like stretch our creativity and our imagination in the way that we color grade, because that comes up all the time where you may not literally have your hands tied to a finite set of tools, but we all have scenarios where we need to solve an unforeseen problem and we have to kind of make up a solution along the way. So what I'm hoping is we get some opportunities to stretch all of our imaginations of like, okay, what if I did have to accomplish that with only this? And maybe we can all benefit from that. So that's kind of the idea, the theme here is to sort of stretch our imagination and our versatility as colorists in unfamiliar situations. All right, I'll give you guys just another second here. I'm gonna, while we're getting that ready, let's go ahead and wipe out our normal business of our node tree here. I'm already color managed. I'm gonna work under a look, and I'm gonna say that's fair play as a baseline. That's not really a color grading tool. That's a pipeline conceit. So this will be the context under which we do our grading, and we'll do everything here, obviously, at the clip level. So what do you think, Annie? Do we have enough to pick two clear top winners, or two that maybe you just feel are particularly delicious?
I'm seeing a lot of people wanting to use the RGB mixer right off the bat. That's definitely the winner.
Okay.
I think
RGB
the
mixer is
runner
one.
up, it would be curves right now.
Oh,
If anyone in
okay.
the chat is like wanting to fight that, let me know. But that's what I'm seeing
Okay.
as the runner up.
Let's narrow in. Let's make it hard on Colin. Like if you give me all of these curves, I'm good. Like that barely feels like an inconvenience to me. So let's pick one. There's lots of good ones in there. So let me know what you guys, if there's one that you want to pick from within here. This might be interesting because, yeah, I'm trying to think how I'll approach this. I haven't told you guys my third. I'm going to save casting my formal vote for what my third tool will be until we get our two firmed up. But my initial thought was my third is probably going to be custom curves here. But if we're doing a curves one anyway, I might keep it fun and say, let's do like, I don't know, we could do HDR or primaries. Primaries feels like cheating. I feel like I'm gonna put a fence up around primaries, because that one we know we can get a lot of what we need to in there. So let's say we're gonna do RGB mixer, some kind of curves, and I'll probably do HDR as the third, just so no one thinks I'm taking it too easy on myself.
Yeah, we've definitely had some people throw in the HDR wheels to be mean to you.
Hey, you know what? I think we've only done one video with it so far, but I'm kind of like, I'm back on HDR. Like, actually, we can talk about this for a second. Maybe we talked about it the other day already. I can't remember, in last grade school. But the thing that I like about HDR right now is within my new conceit of like, oh, I just want to do all my exposure and tonal stuff in one node. If I want to do the ideal form of exposure, I can't do that in this one node because I would ideally flip things into linear and do gain in linear. But I can flip over to HDR and work things in there, hit my exposure in that zone, which is going to be exactly the same thing as linear gain, and then I can bounce back to my primaries to work, you know, like my lift, gamma, gain, whatever else I want to touch. So it may only be one wheel in HDR, but I'm a new adoptee of the HDR palette, at least for that convention, because it allows me to do my ideal form of exposure while still keeping to the convention of a single node for all tonal stuff, as opposed to our sort of like prior generation of one node for exposure, one node for contrast and stuff. All right, so we're gonna do RGB mixer, some kind of curve. What do you think, Annie? Do we have a clear winner on which of the curves we should do?
We've got some votes for Sat V Loom curve.
Oh, that is devious. I actually like the Sat V Loom curve, but to use it as one of my three precious tools,
Yeah,
that's devious.
that's rough.
So I'm going to say that makes it a good candidate. Okay, RGB mixer, Sat V Loom, and then let's go HDR. Let's work with that. That's a funky set of tools. None of those are tools that I regularly use for the purpose of like doing a primary shaping of a grade. So this ought to be fun. Okay, well, let's grade something. Let's do something. I'm gonna just get warmed up on a shot here and then start dropping your questions in of like, either practical things you're really thinking about or stuff that you're like, that would be impossible with this tool set. How would we accomplish it? Like anything along those lines is fair for exploration in my book. So let's say we're going to use our, this is fun, RGB mixer, SAT-V-Loom, and HDR. So let's say, for example, we want to do our, if we're talking about sort of working through normal process with kind of subbed in tools, if I wanted to work my exposure and tonal stuff, that's not crazy difficult because I still have exposure in HDR. And then I think what I would probably do is define my ranges. Just want to make sure you guys can see everything here. So I'm going to kill my scopes for a minute and pop this out. And what I'm probably going to do here is, this is actually an exercise I've done before that I highly encourage. You can just wipe out temporarily these zones and kind of build everything from zero. So let's start with black and say black is actually, this is kind of fun. I'm going to define a black that I think is useful. So I've got my black and I'm going to say that should go all the way up to, I wish I had a little bit more. Let's do this. Am I allowed to use DaVinci Wide Gamut Gray to orient myself? I'm doing it, so the answer has to be yes. So my black runs all the way up to DaVinci Wide Gamut Gray. Okay, now we're going to say my highlight. That seems sensible actually, but let's go to DaVinci Wide Gamut Gray and let's go one stop over. So I'm going to go to 0.36. Let's actually say, let's say three stops over. No, I want to go narrower. Let's say 2 stops over. Okay, so now I've set a 2 stops over point here. That's where my highlight is going to start, like so. Oh, hang on. Am I moving my black again? Yeah. Here's what I want to do for that. So I've got my black, which starts here. So you guys can see I've defined the edge of my black zone as ending at where mid-gray is toothing on this graph. And I've got highlights that are starting at, what do we say, 2 stops over mid-gray, right here, okay? This is a bit confusing because these zones reset every time I tap over to the gray patch. But that's about all I need for the gray patch. And then I'll disable this for now in case I need it for my third option, which is going to be, I want to define some sort of middle. So let's do this. It's been a while since I did this. I guess you can't actually delete these default zones. So I'm just going to call this one middle. I'm building what you could think of as lift gamma gain right now. And so for my middle, I'm going to say, let's put that sort of in between these other two things. So that's going to go start right where black finishes. It should have some overlap actually. Like this is a great exercise because it starts to give us a sense for like how we define the ranges of tools. Like this should interact with the low end and it should interact with the high end as well. Now where is my, okay, so that's my high end. Let's see here. I need zones on either side. So we're going to do this. Let's just wipe this out. Yeah, so if I create a new zone, I'm essentially trying to figure out how to have a start and an end to this zone. Is that what this is? There's this guy. Oh, can I only define it in one direction? I thought for sure you could define a range on either side. Like what about, let's turn our black and our middle and our highlight off and look at some of these stock ones. Okay, I guess I already learned something new about the HDR palette. Okay, so we got our black, we've got our highlight, and we've got a middle that we can't exactly define. So instead of defining it on both, we can't exactly define a left and a right edge. So I'm going to say instead, I can do, how could I do this? That's my range, that's my fall off. Maybe it's just defined, oh, is this what it is? It is defined by the zone that stacks over top of it. I think that might be a thing. Like if I have my highlights set up in this way, I should now be able to take my, and also does this map to my control surface? So now I'm working my middle. No, that's still moving up above the highlight range, isn't it? This is like what we're doing right now. This is a pretty good, pretty important part of the process of this or any other scenario where you're kind of like kitting out a different approach. Is it's like you're going to spend, I'm going to spend anyway, a good amount of time sort of like sharpening the axe before I chop the firewood, if that makes sense. So we've got our middle living here. Okay, so that just lets me define if it's a range above or a range below. So if I've got this, and that's my middle, okay, I'm going to say that's more sensible for my middle. I'm also going to say this one's probably not going to get a lot of play. Primarily, I'm going to be looking at my black and my highlights. And what's fun here is like I can continue to revise this, but for now, let's say here's our new sort of prime node that we're going to use here, like so. We can grab a still of that. And so let's start doing like some basic like exposure contrast here. Exposure feels pretty good. If I want to, you know, like shut down or open up or anything, I'll just kind of touch this to see if there's anything that needs or wants doing there. And now I can work, you can see here in my HDR palette, I've killed those default zones. I've built my own tool almost, and I've got black, middle, and highlight, with middle being less than ideal because it doesn't go too high, but it does go too low, if that makes sense. You can see like it's got everything I want included in its range. It just has stuff below its range included as well. So for that reason, I'm going to try to avoid it. So let's say here with my black, I'm going to open this up, and then with my highlights, maybe bring those down a little bit like so. And we can just kind of feel out how we're doing here. Yeah, so I'm at the moment kind of taking a lot of the intensity contrast-wise out of this, but these feel like pretty serviceable tools. So that would be like the HDR setup for things. Obviously, we're not going to go through this same like setting up the tool process with our other tools, but like let's go to our RGB mixer. I'm just going to finish out the approach for this shot before we start looking at any questions you guys might have. So here's what I'm thinking here. The first sort of premise for me, first thing that clicks in my mind when you guys told me the RGB mixer, I'm really fired up you told me the RGB mixer because I can do gain for balance or for exposure right here in the RGB mixer if I want to. Anyone have an idea how I would do that? Think about it for a second. Answer to yourself. All I got to do is move my my like unit inputs or my like on axis inputs here. So if I do, the only downside here is I can't do the same, like I can't balance with my trackballs here. But if I were like, all right, this, I want to get, let's see, I want to get like a little warmer here. I could pull some blue from my, oh wait, that's in my red output. Got to get reoriented here. I want to pull blue from my blue output. And that's going to give me a little more yellowy, and then I'm going to add some red to my red output. Right now, this is just gain. All I'm doing is trimming blue gain and increasing red gain, like so. and I haven't even done anything fancy, which by the way, I may want to, like, if we talk about any kind of like hue rotation stuff, this is gonna be the tool that I use because it's the only of these three. Well, actually that's not true. HDR, I can push things all around. I can't really do, can I do hue rotations in HDR? I can do global hue. Can I do local hue? Wow, those crazy big scopes. I don't need those in my life. Yeah, I can do global hue, but that's not a per zone thing, I don't think. No, so I can do global hue here. So that's kind of helpful, but my first thought was about the other thing I can use RGB Mixer for is to do hue adjustments, although I do have that wheel in HDR. So I've actually got a couple options there as well. But starting point here, I'm not even like, other than not having a trackball, I don't even really feel that far off my game in terms of my ability to do something like warm the image, because I've already got, all I have to do is work my, like on axis terms, my blue and blue or my red and red as the examples here, to get that warmth that I'm looking for. So that's a pretty good start. And then Sat v Lume, that would of course be more of a secondary thing. But if we wanted to get some extra density out of this thing, color density is my new term of choice there, then we could shape a Sat versus Lume curve. This one doesn't have anything particularly high saturation in it, but if we go to, like this one will respond quite a bit in those more saturated areas, as an example. Okay, anyone have any topics, suggestions, things you want to explore with this tool set?
We have one question asking from Marcus if you can tell us what kind of look and feel you're going for before getting into this.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so that's a fair question. I would say, like, at the moment, look and feel, that's being governed here by the look that I've chosen. And to be honest with you, I don't have necessarily an articulate look and feel other than, maybe the look and feel that was originally envisioned for this film when I graded it, which was, to do like an elevated, like high contrast, like eye-catching grade that, feels like very subtly filmic. A lot of that character is coming from the look itself. So I'm not necessarily trying to create a look here in the images. I'm just trying to kind of like grade and tune them and elevate that a bit further. So what we do from here, what we're going for, I would say I'm kind of starting, whether we're on this footage, I'm on a timeline of like mixed footage, of course, like on any of these shots, I'd say I'm starting from like a level, like this feels and looks good to me type of place. And it's just a question of like, all right, what's our primary grade going to be, like exposure, tonality? What's our balance going to be? And then what else might we want to do to elevate the image a little bit? So that could be, of course, any of the things that we've talked about thus far. So that's kind of generally the look and feel that I'm going for. And that's a good distinction too, because like, if you were to tell me I had to build a look with these three tools, that would be a very different challenge. It'd be an interesting challenge, but that's part of the reason why already, like with just a couple minutes of like, all right, let's kind of get the HDR palette set up in a way that works for me and like, just kind of like playing around with stuff for a minute, I already kind of feel like not that out of my element, if that makes sense, because I've got the tools that I need to do color grading, if that makes sense. Less so the tools that I need to do look development. I'll keep playing around here, and then if you guys have stuff you want to explore or try, then let me know. Let's go back to, let me poke around here, and let's think about like, I don't know, this shot's a good example where, let me grab this HDR thing again, our template that is. I'm going to reset this and then resave it so that I've got my HDR template. And let's actually even build this out. We could say, here's our mixer, and here's our Sat v Lume. We can save all that as our preset. We can even ripple that out everywhere. like so. And so on this one, you know, same thing. Like I would grade it. Like, I guess we should talk for a second about like why I chose to like wipe out the HDR palette and work from scratch. Here, this sort of speaks to like my issue with the HDR palette. I think the number one challenge of it is, at least one of the top challenges of the HDR palette for me, is that it is too narrow. Like the zones that come with it by default, that's like slicing the image too finely for my taste, and it's too easy to create implausible, strange looking grades with these like default zones, just because they're too, you can see them here when I go to a new node. Black, dark, shadow, light, highlight, specular. Like I kind of get the idea, but like it just feels a little too like narrow and too easy to get strange results out of. Like, this is a very good example. Like this, I might not like doing the equivalent of this with like lift and gain, like, but this just looks weird. Like it looks really strange in a different way. And part of that is because I've got these, like this narrow drop followed by a narrow hump that is creating it. So that's my idea here, is like, I just want to get back into a place where I'm more comfortable as a colorist at least, which is to have, all right, like you've got your low end, you've got your high end, or rather you've got your, let's wipe this, you've got your low end, you've got your high end here, which as I audition this, it's also bringing out the other thing that I kind of beef on with the HDR palette that I can't do much about, which is like the sort of saturation preserving behavior. Like it's trying to keep the colors preserved, which I appreciate, but can feel a little bit weird to me at stronger strengths. But having this broader fall off here, and this is something else I could have done, is like I could increase this fall off. So it's a really mellow transition, or like the influence is like very mellow in its range. Like that could be fun too. And that could be another way of like sort of guarding against stuff starting to feel like odd or overworked, if that makes sense. And I might even want to do like, you know, I've got my black and I've got my middle. Another way you could look at this, like if we look at taking this opportunity to sort of build our own primaries, if you want to think about it that way, would be, let's just do a new serial node here. And same thing, I'm just going to start by wiping things out as the starting point, or even just copy and paste this. So now we could have, maybe we have black that goes way lower. It just becomes like more of a toe. And then the dark does more of what we were playing with before. Shadow we still leave off. These pieces we still leave off. And now I might find I've got more opportunity to do like a gentle toe type of thing, like open up the very bottom end and then in that next dark zone, kind of play it against, like so. Although that's starting to feel real weird, and that dark zone doesn't feel like it's, I feel like this black maybe needs to come up a little bit more and needs a little more fall off. And then I need to just maybe not go so far with the dark zone there. I don't know. I was looking at like, oh, would it be interesting to have like a little dedicated like toe that I could work that's smaller than my overall kind of shadow area and only hits at the very bottom. Based on like what I'm seeing here in the image and also like the curve that it's drawing, I don't love that. So I would instead probably stick with more like this, where I'm just working that black in a broad sense here. Let's see. There we go. And playing the middle against it. Pretty good example here of like broad beating narrow. Like I'm doing a similar thing here of like the bottom up and the middle down, but it just feels more organic because the zones are broader and have like more fall off to them. So that's kind of the idea that I'm going for when I'm using this tool. And yeah, honestly, I would probably just take a lighter touch here if I was indeed handcuffed to this tool, just because it does feel like, starts to feel a little bit funky to my eye. But that's pretty decent. And then if we look at our mixer, let's say we really wanted to go for a warm thing here, like we were doing before. Maybe we want to do like a more of a cool thing. In that case, like what would we do? We could do our green and green and our blue and blue. And just kind of like move those things in parallel with each other. I can also, if we agree that it is, I could preserve luminance or not as one thing. That's very similar to having your lum mix on or off in your primaries here. I could leave that on or off as I see fit. I could also, if we all agree it's fair play, flip this into linear. Like so. And now I'll get more of a sort of like, yeah, more of a linear response, more of like altering the original captured signal than I was before. And this takes a little bit of work, but I effectively feel like if I'm balancing things with these knobs instead of with my primaries, it's kind of like a temp tint type of approach where I'm just trying to work these two knobs and keep the signal mass in my vector scope here kind of running along the skin tone line. So if I start going way over here, I'm like, that's probably not the vibe, or way over there, that's not the vibe. Just kind of want to move these things together in such a way that we are staying roughly along that axis, like so. And that's, you know, probably way too far of an adjustment, but we could of course back that off from there. But that's a slightly different but pretty comfortable way of balancing the image for me. I'm trying to think what else we could do. What else could be fun here? Well, let me pause. Any other questions out there?
We have a note from Cower about, he said you have the stops laid out on the HDR zones graph itself. 0 is middle gray, and each thicker line is one stop.
Oh yeah, thanks, buddy. So 0 is, oh, I see, like right here in the middle there. Actually, this will be fun to kick around. I've noticed those before, and I was totally ignoring them right now. I think maybe partially because I don't fully trust them. Though apparently I should, shouldn't I? Because that at least holds really well. And what if I go to +4, which if I understand math would be 2.88? No, I guess that's not right. That would be 0.36 would be 1, 0.72 would be 2, 1.44 would be 3, 2.88 would be 4, wouldn't it? Someone tell me why my math is wrong. Oh, I'd say, never mind, I maxed out on my middle gray slider here. Let's try it the opposite direction. Let's try -4. So that would be 0.09 is 1, 0.045 is 2, 0.0225 is 3, and then 0.1125 or 0.01125 would be -4, right? Oh, I've run out of range there too. Okay, well, I was just curious to validate, but that seems to be working pretty well. And then like, yeah, the other vertical lines here, which are a little bit obscured by, what if I kill all these zones so I can see the vertical hash marks really easily? So if I understand Cower correctly, we should, like this next vertical line here should be -1, right? Cool. Okay, rad. So that actually is trustworthy. Something else that I've long been underconfident about. Okay. Well, you guys let me know if you have other questions on this. We can maybe kind of circle back to that, but let's also, maybe we can just zoom out at this point and go free for all. I don't feel like there's not necessarily a ton that we're eager to explore within this tool set, or maybe it's more a matter of like I should be driving and just going through and grading shot by shot, but you know, like we could play with that for a minute. A little tricky again because I don't have much scene flow going on in these shots, but like let's do this. Let's grade we're gonna grade 14 through 21. So if we do that this way, you know, a lot of this stuff is nicely shot to begin with, so we'll set that exposure, work the low and middle against each other, which is like almost always something, it's almost like a second like exposure thing. I'm always just gonna audition doing some amount of that just to see how it feels. And then highlights I usually won't touch unless I feel like there's a specific need to. Balance feels good. Sat v Loom, that just, I feel like is kind of a secondary that we've elected to incorporate. And if in general, I would, you know, just look at doing something like that to taste. And then that would be our grade for this. We move on to this one and go exposure down. Something feels did I blur something somewhere? Something feels soft. Okay, maybe not. Maybe I'm crazy. Feels a little bit soft. Maybe that's something we can try to address. But yeah, so I'm going to bring exposure in a little bit. Definitely going to want to work. Oh, sorry. I'm doing offset. Reverting back to my old ways. Yeah, so we got our HDR here. Bring those blacks up. Let's get that. I actually like looking at this zone readout when I'm working in here. Yeah, like, can you guys see what I mean here? Like, sorry, HDR tool, to beat up on you because you're doing a good job, but like, can you see how this just starts to feel like weird in like the way her skin is flattening out? There's something about it that I don't like. But regardless, we can pick up these shadows a little bit, just not too far. And then maybe drop that middle and just see how that's feeling. Yeah, like that's nice. Maybe come a little bit back with that exposure. Balance-wise, that feels fine to me here. Feels like those, let's say we're trying to kind of make those two flow, same environment, those both feel good. Let's check out this one. Can open up a little bit. Soften the bottom, kind of just shape things here in this area. Yeah, that looks nice. Maybe because we've boosted overall exposure quite a bit, I could grab these highlights and kind of bring them in. I wonder, does this work? Can I audition? That's kind of fun. I can audition the effect of a particular adjustment on a zone by flipping this off and on. Yeah, that feels nice. Kind of pulling that in. Let's say for these two shots in this kind of night vibe, we want to go like maybe a little more cyan-y than we're currently getting. So I'm going to flip my mixer into linear here. And actually this is really fun because I feel like now I'm like, okay, well, option number one would just be to add some green and green. Or I could think about like, I'll have to kind of like reason through this for a second. Like, what if I added some blue to my green? Like that, essentially I'm saying like, hey, take the blue energy and let it produce more of a response in the green channel. Like that's kind of interesting. And then on the blue side, I could even go negative and say, let's pull out some blue and blue, which is going to end up netting us yellow. So maybe that's not the move. Like, yeah, if I do blue and blue, green and green, let's just try this. Like, so let's say that's like going more for that cyan-y thing, like with a blue and blue, green and green type of approach. I want to get a little bit more. Oh, and I also kind of want to try leaving that luminance turned off. That's good for now, I guess. Okay, so let's grab, that's using blue and green and blue and blue. Let's now try it using just green and green and blue and blue. So let's try like so and like so. Let's just compare. Yeah, so that's interesting. I'm kind of like, I'm getting more rotation with that second approach, or rather with that first approach. You can see here, like, this area of the vector scope is holding more along the skin tone line. This direction where I'm just effectively doing gain, I'm like kind of moving the entire signal, whereas here I'm maybe having a little better luck at just rotating things because of that blue and green as opposed to green and green type of approach. So I do think I like that better. And could I go even further? What if we did this? What if we killed our blue and blue and we took our green and messed with our green and blue now? So let's see. So that would be our blue output green. And add some green there. That's kind of interesting. So kind of good example of like when you're using a different tool, probably over time you end up adapting your use. Like my first instinct was like, oh, for like balancing or color stuff, I'm just going to use this as an RGB gain, but I'm already coming up with excuses to do stuff that I couldn't do here because it's there and to get different results, which in this case I think I prefer. If anything, that might be too far, but if it's allowed, I'm just going to do that and key output gain it back a little bit. And if we advance forward here, what we should hopefully find is that that travels pretty well, which I would say it does. And let's look at on this previous node. Yeah, that's working well too. All right, let's keep going here. So I'm going to reset this one, and we're in a new zone here. This looks great to me already. I'm just going to spin my exposure, see if there's anything to optimize in there. Let's go to the HDR palette so we can see it. Maybe do my same thing. This move is getting me a lot less mileage in HDR than it usually would with primaries. Like, it's almost worth doing a side-by-side here. Like, let's reset again, and I'll show you guys what I mean. Like, my go-to move for like a shot like this, where I'm like, I want to like touch it just to make sure I can't make it better in some way, but I already feel pretty good about it. The go-to move would be to touch exposure and just let it naturally find its own landing spot. If that's back at 0, that's fine. If it lands a little bit higher or lower, then glad that I touched it. And then like normally I would do, I'm gonna break the desert island rules just for the sake of drawing a comparison and say I want to do lift and gamma and kind of play those against each other, and also kind of probably drive up gain as well, just to get like a different shaping of my contrast. In this case, that's netting me like pretty darn close to what I already had, which might be a clue that not much is needed, but you know, like little nudge there. This is probably, we could do a better example on something with heavier shadows, but the equivalent of it on the HDR palette has felt kind of elusive. Like taking this up and then going to that middle range and dropping it down. I don't know, that's not terrible. And I will say this, like I like, let's, I'm gonna break this into 2 nodes so we can addition exposure and tone adjustments separately. So on this one, we're gonna reset exposure. And on this one, I'm gonna kill the black and the highlight in the middle. So this is just exposure now, and this is just the tonal stuff. Like this is actually interesting. Something else you could look at using the HDR palette for is like, this actually feels kind of like it's like, I feel like there's some extra sharpness coming into play here. You guys see what I mean there over the stream, before, after? It's like bringing out a little more texture, like not in an unpleasing way. So that sort of more complicated like color response that the HDR palette is giving, that might be something that I could get used to, or that I could like deploy under the right circumstances. Like that's actually not, that's not feeling too crazy, that particular adjustment. And this one I wasn't necessarily, just now I wasn't necessarily trying to match, but if I do a similar thing, like this is a good example. Can you guys see that? I know I'm like torture testing you, but like here is lift gamma gain. Here's the HDR palette. Like the way that like color sort of bleaches in these brighter areas of the face, and like there's just like these subtle textural differences between the two that, I don't know, they're not necessarily better or worse than one another, at least here. They're just different. And it's even easier to see it almost at the wide level. Just has a different feeling to it, working here versus there. So anyway, just some passing observations about the stack here. And then on this one, let's do that same thing that we auditioned like almost first thing up. Let's just go with like a warm thing. But again, let's try using some of the RGB mixer-ness of the thing. So let's think through this again. If I want to, you know, like get almost like some warming and hue rotation, we could start with like red and red, green and green. Or even like, I think before I was pulling blue, which is a good way of getting it yellow. So if we say our blue and blue, it's gonna come down and we'll get more yellowy. And then like this is where it could get fun. Now we could say, I want to increase my red response based on the absence of blue. That's not really what I want. Maybe I want something more like that. It's not like super intuitive for me, but you can see this is actually compressing the range of colors, right? Like I'm doing my blue and red right now. So increasing red output based on strength of blue type of thing. Or we could say in our, because right now what I'm looking at, like when I just do negative blue, this is going too much of a yellowy warm. So I'm just thinking about like, okay, if this was RGB balance, I would just, the way I would deal with that is I would increase my red, like so. But I'm like, since we're in the RGB mixer, if we want to get less yellow, that would mean less green in broadest terms. So what if we were to say like, based on our, I don't know, based on our green input, let's increase our red output. Like that's starting to move the right direction. And, or you could do on the green side, you could say based on our blue input, decrease the green output. And of course, it's a little trickier because I'm not explicitly trying to pull green. It actually looks like, oh, hang on. I'm on the wrong piece here. Let's do green. Yeah, so diminishing blue in my green output. That's kind of interesting. Let's just like grab a still of that and compare to if we had done just a normal like plus red plus green type of thing. Okay, so in this case, I definitely prefer like this is too strong at the moment, but I like the amount of separation that we are, oh, hang on, let's reset those. I like the amount of separation that we're retaining when we do it this way, as opposed to like the fact that it's being sort of all compressed together. But this could actually be interesting to have as like just a continuous extension of your balancing tool. Like what if you did all your balancing with the RGB mixer, used your red and red, green and green, and blue most of the time, and then when you were like, oh, I want to get whatever, like a more like, you want to get hue rotation, or in this case, like essentially like diminish your, like get more of a washed feel. It's kind of interesting that it might all be in one tool. All right, and then a couple more here. Let's go on, for now though, let's say we're happier with that. I'm gonna back off a little bit more and back off here a little bit more. It's feeling too saturated to me now as well. So if I wanted to do something about that, I could now, in a separate RGB mixer, this is a fun side note too. Separate RGB mixer, if I just uniformly reduce my, let's say I want to go to, I'm going to go to a 0.9 on my red and red, 0.9 on my green and green, 0.9 on my blue and blue. That's just desat. So that's actually could be a handy thing. I wonder if is there a way to gang these? Doesn't look like it on my control surface. But regardless, like you could even do something like this, like say this is if I'm like, hacking together my toolkit here and I want a desat knob, I could drop these all to a 0.5, set my key output gain, and then just set my key output gain to 0 and increase it kind of to taste. So like the more I go up, the more desat I'm gonna get. And now I'm getting a nice warming without going too far desaturated. Cool. And let's look over here. Will it travel? It seems to. That's a nice 1-2 punch of RGB mixer, right? And we'll just finish it out and do the same thing here. And this is also rippling our primaries, which at the moment I'm not mad at. Maybe this one wants a little more, what am I adjusting right now? There we go. Wants a little bit more exposure. Something more like that. And then I can go to this next node. We've just ended up, because we were doing that demo where we've got our tone and our exposure separate, which I wouldn't stick with necessarily, but we can ride with it for these last couple shots. And then we could look at this shot. Yeah, those same little adjustments feel pretty good. Okay, that was fun. Going through a couple more of these and actually getting a little more grading. Oh, let's do this one too. Let's match this into 20, like so. Yeah, that's pretty good. Open up a little bit more here. We're feeling like, well, there's just a little bit more green in the world here. This one, looking at it fresh now, I'm like, all right, we could maybe boost that desat up just a little bit more here, which will give you a better match there in her skin tone. Okay. Fun. Oh my goodness, is it 11:10 already? Wow. All right, let's take a couple questions, if y'all have them.
Leon wants to know if you find yourself adjusting saturation because of tonality and exposure changes, or do you usually just relate a saturation node to the image as a whole?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say in general, like saturation, I'm kind of trying to find reasons to avoid, like in a vacuum, like if I'm landing on a shot, like on any of these shots before having done anything, if I'm consistently feeling like I don't often get that itch to adjust saturation as like, you land on a shot and it's too colorful. If I do have that sort of feeling, I'm often trying to address it with balance before saturation. Like you guys have heard me use this rule of thumb before, but a large portion of the time when you're looking at a shot and you think it feels too saturated, it's actually specifically skin tones that are too saturated, and it's a good portion of the time that can be best remedied just by balancing a little bit cooler. So that tends to be my move there. But yeah, like if you're making big honking, like specifically contrast changes, like exposure won't do this, but contrast, like if we just go back to primaries land for a second, like if I, like really increase my contrast, which I'm not loving what's happening here, but you can see in the vector scope, that's ballooning way the heck out. So that is a scenario where like you will often want to then trim in saturation to sort of keep it at that same level. The other option you could use here, if that's why you're getting that itch, would be that luminosity composite mode. So now we're getting the contrast without any effective saturation change here, although this is a good example of one where it actually feels like it's desaturating as a result. So you could also, in a situation like this, kind of like blend in between those and do something like, how can we do that? Let me turn this composite mode back to normal. And we could say like composite mode color, and then we could key output gain this back. So now I actually have in my here, I have explicit control over how much of that sort of saturation preserving or saturation, what ends up feeling like saturation decrease, that would be a way to get at it. But yeah, I feel like that's often like where the itch to adjust saturation comes from. Like sometimes I feel like, especially in commercial, a lot of the time, like we set a look, we set saturation as kind of as high as we reasonably can at the look level, and then still like the kind of like the agenda that we're having to hit in every shot is like, can we boost the saturation anymore? So I'm often looking to add more as opposed to like, I'm very rarely saying that's too saturated, reaching for the saturation knob and pulling it back. Whether that's right at the outset or even after making a contrast adjustment like this, because usually if I'm making a contrast adjustment like this, it's because the shot is an outlier from the rest of the project, because by default, my contrast ratio should be pretty decent as defined by my look. So if I'm having to really hit contrast hard, that's because the shot is significantly lower in contrast than its neighbors, and it doesn't necessarily look bad to take on a little bit of saturation as its contrast gets increased. Or if it does, you could use some version of the trick that we just looked at, either just straight up composite mode luminosity on your prime node, or if you want extra control, do the full on layer mixer, composite mode, color, and then down here in the lower branch, set your key output gain to 0, and then just start to increase that until you're getting that kind of like balance of saturation that you're looking for. Okay, let's do one more.
Someone wants to know if the HDR wheels preserve saturation or increase or decrease depending on the contrast.
They are designed to preserve saturation. Saturation is like a very tricky thing because it's something we see, but they are designed to be saturation preserving. And I actually have to say, like, this is more time than I've spent in the HDR palette, like in like a year, the last hour that we spent in here. It's not a tool that I reach for very often, except for the global exposure thing that we talked about at the beginning of the session. But I have to say, like, having spent time with it today, it's actually doing a better job than I think maybe I've given it credit for in the past, of like, it's trying to hold saturation. Like you can see the vector scope is holding pretty well, and the image, like that feels like similar levels of saturation, maybe more so than if I were making a similar adjustment in primaries. So yes, it is trying to lock saturation. I think the challenge comes that at a certain point, like saturation and luminance should be tied together. So like making this much change in shadows, even though it would look weird even if I did it in primaries, it looks extra weird because it's retaining all of the saturation that it had at the beginning, if that makes sense. Okay, one more if we got it.
Mian Wang is pointing out a concept with the HDR wheels about rippling any adjustments you do on one wheel to its neighboring wheels with less and less intensity, like manual feathering. Is that kind of part of your process?
Oh, that's interesting. You know, like certainly not something I've like ratified, because like we discussed, it's not a tool that I use much. Here, I think first of all, yes, for sure. Like you're really fundamentally talking about the fact that tools should interact with each other. If they don't interact, like that's the definition of like, if you want a great example of a tool that like does a really poor job of interacting, like do a narrow luminance thing. Like, all right, we've got this very narrow luminance band and not really enough softness on either side. And the moment I do anything to this, even in my primaries, it's just gonna feel weird because it's like moving certain things and leaving others that are quite nearby totally behind, right? So like, that's one of the reasons why Lift Gamma Gain continues to be so popular, is because there's tons and tons of interaction between those. They all touch all of the image. Like they all touch almost all the image, if that makes sense. So that's a good thing, and I think something we would want to repeat in the HDR palette. My first like thought there is that we would want to use that fall off control for that reason. Like that was why I upped it in my template here, so that we've got a little bit more, or at least in one of my passes of defining this. Yeah, at least in the middle and the highlight, I upped it, or in the middle, I upped it a good bit just so that it does have more sort of transition in and out of like what is middle and what is not middle, if that makes sense. I think that scratches the itch pretty well. I think rippling your adjustment from one zone to the next, if you want to call it that, whether it's from lift to gamma or from like what the HDR palette calls black to middle, I think often what you actually want is lots of interaction in like the areas that these different zones will influence, but then you actually want to kind of play those things against each other, if that makes sense. Like one of the most common things that I will do, we've already looked at a good bit today, if I am grading underneath a like higher contrast look, like here's a good example, I'm grading underneath a higher contrast look. I'm just going to go back to dry land for this last question here. If I'm grading under a high contrast look, I like the contrast, but if I want to really shape the image out, like one of the most common sort of like sequences that I'm going to do is lift up, gamma down, gain up. Something like that. Just trying to soften out that low end without necessarily getting the feeling I do when I initially reach for that. Like that lift adjustment, because it's super broad, because it touches almost every area of the image, that just feels like it's flattening out my contrast curve, right? But if I now marry that with a gamma down, that's the next zone over essentially, now I feel like I'm not killing as much contrast, but I am getting more shape in the low end, like so. And then what happens is because gamma and gain have so much interaction, I feel like I'm really starting to drag my highlights down, so I will often stretch highlights back out a little bit. And that might be too far, or I might need to kind of like balance the ratio between those, but that's kind of the idea. And to wrap us out, it wouldn't be grade school without a grayscale ramp. Let me just show you guys, like it's, I think, always fun to graph what we're doing. Like when we are, why my waveform isn't working? Let's try this. You guys ever get this? I feel like it happens sometimes where I just have to reset the whole layout to get things behaving. Let's shrink these down. Get all this stuff out of my way that I don't want to see. And try to get a fresh look at our waveform. There we go. So if I just graph, let's just go full screen with this, or like wipe the full frame. Like that's the net of what I'm doing. You're kind of getting this like rolling softening in the low end without moving. I haven't really moved my middle exposure very much. That's not even explicitly attempting to lock middle exposure. That's just kind of like where my eye has left me. So I think that's another way you could look at this, is like this is a way of, this is like a way of sort of like finessing those zones, or like creating like sort of a chain of events between them that feels soft and continuous and organic, but that still allows you to make more targeted adjustments in specific zones. Okay guys, that was fun. I don't know, felt kind of weird, but like definitely feel like I stumbled into a few interesting things that I hope were useful for the rest of us as well, including like, you know, like when to just work the like on axis terms of your 3x3 matrix in the RGB mixer versus when to like start doing, you know, green and red or whatever, like off axis terms. Fun discoveries about the HDR palette, and I really enjoyed like setting up my own custom zones. And I feel like if you took away the primaries from me tomorrow, with enough time, I could really fine tune those zones into a place that would work for me. And like I said, I also feel like the very different behavior in the way that primaries handle saturation as you manipulate tones versus HDR, I kind of came to appreciate the way HDR does it a little bit more today, even if it's not necessarily what I would want in most or all cases. I can see its merit, and I actually feel like I honestly might even reach for that a little more readily in the future. Like, oh, I actually want it to get more of that HDR zones behavior as opposed to the saturation behavior that you get when altering tonality inside of the primaries. So fun stuff all around. Sorry, Sat vLoom, you didn't get much play, but hopefully we're all kind of hip on what Sat vLoom does, and I'm a fan of the operator. I think it just has to be done, you know, in the right measure and sort of flagged in the right way. Great way of creating, you know, like color contrast and, you know, like separation in the image in general. So no shade, Sat vLoom, we love you. thanks for hanging out, guys. Sorry we were a couple minutes late, but glad we got in our full sesh. And yeah, we got lots of fun stuff coming up here on the channel, and looking forward to catching up with you guys soon in the next one. And thanks to Annie for co-hosting. Have a good one, gang.